30 lashes, then exile. The beta's voice was bored. Too merciful, said the Alpha King. Put out her eyes first. Let her stumble blind into the snow. Otella's hands shook against the rope. She didn't mean to say it. The word just fell out of her, soft as a prayer. Malakash, the king's knife clattered to the stone. In the sudden, terrible silence, 100 wolves stopped breathing. Let's begin. The great hall of the Black Pine Pack stank of wet fur, judgment, and burning pine resin. The torches along the granite walls hissed every time the wind found a crack in the mortar, but the 100 pairs of eyes fixed on the center of the floor didn't blink. Tella knelt on the stone. Her knees had gone numb an hour ago. The rough-spun wool of her servant's dress was thin enough that she could feel every chill and divot in the floor. A strand of mousy brown hair had escaped her braid and stuck to the corner of her lips, but she didn't dare lift her bound hands to move it. She kept her eyes down. That was the rule. Don't look at the king. Don't speak to the king. Don't breathe in the king's direction. O Tella of the fallow fields. The voice of Beta Inez cut through the hall like a whip. Inez was a sharp-featured woman with silver streaks in her black hair, and the kind of posture that made you feel like you were taking up too much space just by existing. You stand accused of trespassing across the veiled river border, a crime punishable by 30 lashes and exile. Not standing, Otella thought bitterly. I'm on my knees in a puddle, but the charge was worse than Inez let on. Exile in late autumn was a death sentence dressed up in mercy. No wolf without a pack survived the first freeze. And the veiled river. She'd only crossed it because the fire in the eastern village had driven the deer out and her father's traps had been empty for a week. It was cross the boundary or starve. She chose the boundary. Otella's voice cracked from disuse. She hadn't spoken since the warriors dragged her from the woods 3 days ago. They'd thrown her in a root cellar and forgotten to give her water until the second day. Silence. Inez snapped her fingers. Wales, read the king's precedent. On the dais, a young steward with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch in his left eye, Wales, unfurled a scroll of birch bark. His voice was reedy, but it carried in the deathly quiet of the hall. In the 3rd year of King Louis's reign, the matter of border integrity was settled. Any human found east of the Veiled without written seal of passage shall be considered a hostile infiltrator. Penalty. The cage. Otella's stomach dropped through the floor. She had expected lashes. The cage was something else entirely. It was an iron box hung from the old oak by the guardhouse. They put you in it for 3 days, exposed to the mountain frost and the eyes of the pack. Humans usually came out without fingers or without their minds. A low murmur rippled through the assembled wolves, not of pity, of approval. And then the heat changed. The torches didn't flicker, but the pressure in the room doubled. Otella's lungs struggled to expand. It was like standing at the bottom of a deep, dark lake. The weight of it made her spine want to curve into a bow whether she wanted to or not. She heard the soft scrape of leather on stone. He had been sitting in the shadows of the high seat this whole time. She hadn't been able to see him, only the outline of a massive silhouette against the obsidian throne. Now, King Louis stepped forward into the firelight. Tella's breath hitched. Don't look up, don't look up. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered up once, just a flash, and she caught the hard cut of his jaw and the flat, disinterested gold of his irises. He was young for a king, but there was nothing young in his face. His hair was the color of wet earth, pulled back severely, and a thin white scar bisected his eyebrow, a reminder of the war that had put him on that throne 4 years ago. Louis looked at her like she was a broken hinge on a door he was about to have replaced. 30 lashes and exile is a waste of effort, Louis said. His voice wasn't a roar. It was quiet, which made it infinitely more terrifying. She'll die of infection before she clears the foothills, or she'll come crawling back and we'll have to kill her then. Inez is being sentimental. Beta Inez stiffened. My king, the treaty with the southern baronies. The southern baronies trade us grain because they fear us, not because we follow their rules of execution. Louis descended the 3 steps from the dais. His boots were silent on the stone, a predator's walk. I'm not interested in a show of mercy that takes 3 weeks to fail. If she crossed the river to steal our game, she has the eyes of a hunter. Put them out, then send her back blind. That's a lesson that travels. Hall rumbled with deep-chested growls of assent. Wales, the steward, looked vaguely ill but said nothing. Otella's hands began to shake violently against the ropes. This is it. The terror was so complete it was almost calm. She was going to die. Maybe not today from the knife that took her sight, but soon after, stumbling into a ravine or being taken by coyotes. All for a half-starved rabbit she hadn't even caught. Louis stopped 3 feet from her. She could smell him now, smoke, snow, and something sharp like crushed juniper berries. Get the branding iron. he ordered over his shoulder to Inez. I want it done before the morning watch changes. Felt the world tilt. And then it happened. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was a reflex older than the pack, older than the black pine, older than the mountain itself. Her mother had whispered it to her as a lullaby when the fever took her. If you're ever in the dark and the wolves have you say this, just this once. Otella's lips parted. The word came out not as a scream, but as a quiet, breathy whisper. It was a sound that didn't belong in a human throat. It was a creak of old wood, the crack of ice on a lake in April, the sound of stone falling in a deep cavern. Malakash. Change in the hall was instantaneous. The growls ceased as if a knife had severed every voice in the room. The torches guttered low, the flames turning a sickly shade of blue for a single heartbeat, and King Louis froze, not the freeze of a man pausing to think. This was a full-body lock. His hand, which had been halfway to his belt to unclip his hunting knife, stopped midair. His golden eyes, which had been so bored and cruel, widened. The scar on his brow turned white as the blood drained from his face. Beta Inez took a step forward. My king, what is? Louis didn't hear her. His gaze was drilling into the top of Otella's bowed head. When he spoke again, his voice was a stranger's, hoarse, raw. What did you say? Otella squeezed her eyes shut. Saying it once had been a gamble with her soul. Saying it twice felt like inviting the ceiling to collapse on her. But she was already dead, wasn't she? She whispered it again. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound Otella had ever heard. When she risked a glance up, she saw the alpha king of the Black Pine pack staring at her not with rage or hunger. He was staring at her with fear. Wales dropped his scroll. The birch bark clattered on the stones, and still no one moved. Louis crouched down slowly, bringing his face level with hers. She could see the vein pulsing in his neck. He reached out, and she flinched, expecting the blow. Instead, his rough, calloused fingers brushed the stray hair from her face with a gentleness that was somehow more violent than a punch. Who taught you that? He breathed. The words were barely audible, meant only for her ears. Who are you? Otella had no answer. She was just Otella, daughter of a trapper. She mucked out stables and mended fishing nets. But the way the Alpha King was looking at her now, she realized the terrible truth. She had just uttered the one word in the world that could break him. And she had no idea what it meant. They did not take her back to the root cellar. Instead, King Louis straightened up so abruptly that Otella flinched backward, her bound hands scraping against the rough granite. He didn't help her up. He simply turned to Beta Inez and gave an order so quiet that even Otella, kneeling at his feet, barely caught it. Clear the hall. Now. Inez's sharp features twisted with confusion and the sting of public countermand. My king, the sentence. The sentence is stayed. Louis's voice cracked like a frozen branch. Everyone out. Wales, you stay. Dismissal was absolute. The wolves of the Black Pine pack, warriors and elders alike, rose from their benches in a rustle of leather and fur. They moved with the stiff-legged tension of animals who sensed a predator in their midst but couldn't identify it. Otella watched their boots pass her peripheral vision. No one looked at her. They looked away from her, as if she had suddenly become invisible or sacred. Within 60 seconds, the great hall was empty except for the crackle of the blue-tinged torches, the shuffling feet of steward Wales, and the towering, rigid form of King Louis. Get her off the floor, Louis said, not looking at her. Wales hurried forward, his ink-stained fingers fumbling with the ropes at Otella's wrists. Easy now, murmured under his breath. He was young, perhaps only a year or two older than her 20 winters. His eyes were a soft hazel, and they kept darting to Louis like a rabbit watching a hawk. Can you stand? Otella tried. Her legs had gone to sleep, and she stumbled. Wales caught her elbow and steadied her. The simple kindness of the gesture after 3 days of darkness and thirst nearly undid her. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Bring her to my study, Louis commanded. He was already walking toward a narrow archway at the back of the hall, his stride long and impatient. And Wales, if anyone asks what happened here, the girl fainted. The king showed mercy due to her weakened state, Wales recited quickly, as if he'd been preparing the lie since the word left Otella's mouth. Louis paused at the archway. The torchlight caught the scar bisecting his eyebrow. Acceptable. Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the inner keep. Otella's legs wobbled as Wales guided her forward. What's happening? She whispered. Her voice was still a rasp. What did I say? Wales's grip on her elbow tightened in warning. Don't, he breathed. Don't say it again, not to me, not to anyone, just walk. The king's study was not what she expected. She had imagined a trophy room, skulls of rival alphas, maps of conquered territories, weapons gleaming on the walls. Instead, the chamber was lined with books. Real books, bound in leather and cracked with age. not the birch bark scrolls the pack used for official decrees. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast a boar, and the smell of old paper mingled with the juniper scent she now associated with Louis himself. The king stood with his back to her, facing the fire. His hands were clasped behind him, and she could see the tension in the cords of his neck. He said. Wales guided her to a high-backed chair of dark oak. She sank into it gratefully, rubbing her raw wrists where the ropes had been. Wales, leave us, guard the door, no one enters. Louis still didn't turn around. Wales hesitated for the briefest moment, his hazel eyes meeting Otella's with something that looked like an apology. Then he bowed and slipped out. The heavy iron-banded door thudded shut behind him, and the bolt slid home with a sound of finality. They were alone. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Otella counted her own heartbeats. 20, 30, 40. Finally, Louis turned. The fear she had glimpsed in the great hall was gone, or rather, it had been buried beneath layers of iron control. His golden eyes were unreadable again, but there was a new intensity in them. He was studying her the way a scholar might study a dangerous, previously unknown species of viper. Not a spy, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Otella's voice was small. I'm a trapper's daughter, from the fallow fields. I know where you're from. Inez's scouts pulled your family records. Your father is a drunk. Your mother died of the red fever 6 years ago. You have no siblings. You mend nets for the river fishermen, and you owe 3 silvers to the miller's widow. Otella's jaw tightened. Hearing her meager, tragic little life summarized so coldly was like having a scab ripped off. Then you know I'm nobody. That's the problem. Louis moved away from the fire. He didn't sit. He paced, a caged animal in a room full of books. Nobodies don't know that word. Nobodies don't survive knowing that word. The last person who spoke Malakash in my presence died screaming 3 days later when I ripped his heart out through his spine. Otella's blood turned to ice water. I was 14, Louis continued, his voice flat. He was my uncle. He was trying to use the word to bind me, to take the pack. He failed because he didn't understand what he was invoking. But you, he stopped packing directly in front of her chair. He loomed, blocking out the firelight. You whispered it like a lullaby. Tella's throat closed, her mother, the fever dream, the song. If you're ever in the dark and the wolves have you. My mother, she choked out. She told me before she died. She said to say it only once, only if there was no other way. Louis went utterly still. Your mother's name. Lena of the fallow fields. Lena. He tested the name like it was a piece of rotten meat. There was no Lena in the pack records. Your mother was human. Of course she was. I'm human. Otella's confusion mounted. I don't understand. What does the word mean? Why did everyone run? Louis stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he did something that frightened her more than his anger or his death sentence. He crouched down again, bringing himself to her eye level. But this time, his hand didn't move to brush her hair back. It moved to her chin, tilting her face up firmly, forcing her to look directly into his wolf gold eyes. Malakash is not a word for humans, he said slowly, deliberately. It is the old tongue, the language spoken before the moon split the beasts from the men. It is the sound that unmakes an alpha's command. It is a key that opens the cage of the wolf inside us and lets the monster look out. He leaned closer. She could feel his breath on her lips. It was warm, and it smelled of mint and smoke. If your mother taught you that word, Otella of the fallow fields, then your mother was not human. She was a daughter of the first pack, a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct for 300 years. Otella's mind reeled. Her mother, Lena, who had worn patched aprons and sung off-key while she stirred thin soup. Lena, who had wept when the fever took the neighbor's baby. A wolf. That's impossible, she breathed. Impossible, Louis echoed. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a touch that was strangely intimate, strangely possessive. And yet, when you spoke it, every wolf in that hall felt the floor drop out from under them, including me. His eyes narrowed. Do you know what that makes you, Otella? She shook her head mutely. It makes you the most dangerous person in this kingdom. He released her chin and stood, stepping back. The distance felt like a gulf. And it makes you mine. Mine, the word came out as a squeak. By the old laws, the laws that predate my throne, predate the black pine itself. A human who can speak the old tongue is not a trespasser. She is a claimant. She has the right to challenge for a seat at the Alpha's table. Louis's jaw clenched. But if I acknowledge that right publicly, every rival pack from the Iron Coast to the Sunken Valley will descend on my territory to kill you or steal you. So until I decide what to do with you, you will stay here. You will speak to no one about the word. And you will obey me. Otella's hands were shaking again, but not from cold. What if I refuse? Louis's smile was a thin, terrible thing. Then I will have to assume you are a weapon sent to destroy me, and I will treat you accordingly. He walked to the door and pulled back the bolt. Whales will bring you food and clean water. You'll sleep in the tower room. Don't try the window. It's a 60-foot drop onto flagstones. He opened the door. Wales stood on the other side, pale-faced and clearly having heard nothing through the thick oak. My king, Wales said. Beta Inez is demanding an audience. She says the pack is restless. They want to know why the human was spared. Louis didn't look back at Otella. Tell Inez the girl is under my personal protection due to diplomatic complications. Tell her I will address the pack at the next moon. Until then, anyone who harms a hair on her head answers to me. Wales's eyes went wide, but he nodded. Yes, my king. Louis strode out, leaving Otella alone in the chair, drowning in the scent of old books and juniper smoke. She heard his footsteps fade down the stone corridor, and only then did she let the tears come. They weren't tears of relief, they were tears of terror. Because deep in her bones, in a place she hadn't known existed until an hour ago, something had stirred when she spoke that word. Something old, something hungry. And she had the horrible feeling that whatever it was, it had just woken up. The tower room was not a cell. Tella repeated this to herself as she paced the circumference of the circular stone chamber for the 100th time. A cell had bars and straw and the smell of despair. This room had a feather bed, a woven rug dyed the deep green of pine needles, and a narrow window that looked out over the dark sea of the black pine forest. It had a wash basin with water that was almost warm, a tray of bread and hard cheese that Wales had left on the writing desk, and a small iron brazier that kept the autumn chill at bay. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. She had slept poorly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw King Louis's golden irises inches from her own, heard his voice saying, "It makes you mine." The words coiled in her stomach like a snake. She didn't want to belong to anyone, least of all the alpha who had been ready to blind her and cast her into the wilderness an hour earlier. And worse, far worse, was the stirring. She felt it now, as she paused by the window and pressed her forehead to the cold glass. It was a presence at the base of her skull, a whisper just below the threshold of hearing. When she breathed too deeply, she caught scents she shouldn't be able to detect. The musk of the guard walking the parapet 3 floors below. The iron tang of old blood soaked into the mortar of the keep's walls. The distant, wild smell of pine sap and running deer. What is happening to me? A knock at the door made her jump. It's Wales, came the muffled voice. I have your morning meal and a visitor. Tella's pulse quickened. She crossed the room and opened the door a crack. Wales stood in the corridor, a tray balanced in one hand, his hazel eyes apologetic. Behind him, looming like a storm cloud, stood Beta Inez. The silver-haired woman did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past Wales, her shoulder brushing Otella aside as she strode into the tower room. Her sharp gaze swept the space, the untouched bread, the rumpled bed, the window, before settling on Otella with undisguised contempt. Leave the tray and go, Wales, Inez ordered. Wales hesitated, looking to Otella for confirmation. She gave him a tiny nod. He set the tray on the desk, mouthed, "I'll be outside," and retreated, pulling the door closed behind him. The latch clicked. They were alone. Inez did not speak immediately. She walked a slow circle around Otella, the way a wolf might circle a wounded doe, assessing where to sink the first bite. Otella forced herself to stand still, though every instinct screamed at her to back against the wall. "Smaller than I expected," Inez said finally. "For someone who brought the Great Hall to silence." "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You never do you? The insignificant ones never mean to." Inez stopped her, circling directly in front of Otella. Her eyes were a pale, wintry gray. "I've served the Black Pine Pack for 32 years. I buried Louis's father. I held the line when the Southern Baronies tried to poison our water. I have killed 17 rivals in single combat, and I have never seen the king look at anyone the way he looked at you last night." Otella swallowed. "I don't know why he looked at me that way. Liar." The word was flat, without heat, which made it worse. "You said something in the hall. I didn't hear it, but I felt it. Every wolf in that room felt it. It was like a hand reaching into my chest and squeezing my heart." Inez leaned closer. Her breath smelled of black tea and cloves. "What are you?" Otella thought of Louis's warning. "You will speak to no one about the word." But Inez was the beta, the second in command. Surely she had a right to know. Surely keeping her in the dark was more dangerous. "I'm human," Otella said carefully. "I was born in the fallow fields. My mother was Lena, daughter of—" "Your mother is dead. I checked." Inez cut her off. "Buried in the pauper's plot behind the mill. No marker, no mourners except you. No records of her lineage before she arrived in the fields 23 years ago." The beta's gray eyes glittered. "She appeared out of nowhere, married a trapper, birthed you, and died, conveniently leaving no history behind." Otella's stomach clenched. She had never thought about it before. Her mother had always just been Mama, warm hands, soft songs, the smell of wood smoke and dried lavender. She had never asked where Lena came from because children don't ask those questions. They accept the world as it is given. But now, in the cold light of the tower room, the gaps in her mother's story yawned wide. No family, no hometown, no past. If your mother taught you that word, then your mother was not human. "What do you want from me?" Otella whispered. Inez studied her for a long moment. Then, to Otella's shock, the beta's expression shifted. The contempt didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Want you to understand what you've stepped into," Inez said quietly. "Louis is not a cruel king by nature. He is a desperate one. The Black Pine Pack is surrounded. The Iron Coast wolves raid our eastern villages. Sunken Valley Pack covets our hunting grounds. And the humans of the southern baronies grow bolder every year, pushing their farms closer to the veiled river. We are a pack under siege." She moved to the window, staring out at the forest. The morning light made the silver in her hair gleam. 4 years ago, when Louis took the throne, he was 18. His uncle had just tried to usurp him using forbidden magic. Louis killed him, but the magic left scars. On the pack, on the land, on Louis himself. Inez turned back to face Otella. "He has spent every day since trying to hold us together with nothing but his teeth and his will. And now you arrive, speaking a word that shouldn't exist, carrying a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct." Otella's mouth was dry. "What bloodline?" Inez's lips thinned. "He didn't tell you." "Told me my mother might have been a daughter of the first pack, but he didn't explain what that meant." "Of course he didn't." Inez laughed, a humorless sound. "The first pack were the original wolves, the ones who walked with the moon herself. Their blood was pure, undiluted by centuries of breeding with humans and lesser packs. They could speak the old tongue as easily as you or I breathe. They could command the wind, the stone, the beasts of the forest." Her voice dropped. "And they were all killed. 300 years ago. Hunted down by the packs they once ruled because their power was too great, too unpredictable. Survivors scattered and bred with humans until the blood was so thin it vanished entirely." Tella's knees felt weak. She sank onto the edge of the bed. "Saying I have that blood. Saying you spoke a word that only the first pack could speak, and you survived." Inez crossed her arms. "Which means you are either a miracle or a catastrophe, and Louis doesn't know which one yet, neither do I." A heavy silence filled the tower room. Outside, a raven cawed from the parapet. "Why are you telling me this?" Otella asked. "You clearly hate me. You wanted me lashed and exiled." Inez's jaw tightened. "I don't hate you, girl. I hate what you represent. Change, uncertainty. The possibility that everything we've built here will come crashing down because a half-starved trapper's daughter whispered a word she doesn't understand." She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. "But I love this pack, and if you are what I suspect you are, then you may be the only thing that can save it. Or the thing that finally destroys it." She opened the door. "Louis will call for you soon. He's been in the old archives all night, searching for answers. When he finds them, you'll wish you'd taken the lashes and the exile." Her gray eyes met Otella's one last time. "The cage is merciful compared to what happens to the heirs of the first pack." Door closed. The bolt slid home from the outside. Tella sat on the bed, trembling, staring at the stone wall. The stirring at the base of her skull had grown louder. It was no longer a whisper. It was a voice, ancient and patient, speaking in a language she shouldn't understand. And somewhere deep in the keep, she heard a wolf howl in answer that night. Otella dreamed. She stood in a forest that was not the black pine. The trees were taller, older, their bark silver white and their leaves a shimmering gold. The moon hung low and impossibly large in the sky, close enough to touch, its surface swirling with patterns that looked almost like faces. A woman stood beneath the moon. Her hair was the color of Otella's, mousy brown, unremarkable, but her eyes glowed with a soft silver light. She wore a simple dress patched at the elbows, and she was humming a lullaby. Mama, Lena turned. Her smile was sad and knowing. "You spoke the word," she said. Her voice echoed, layered with harmonics that didn't belong to a human throat. "I hoped you never would." "Did you give it to me?" Otella's dream self asked. "Why didn't you tell me what I am?" "Because I wanted you to have a life." Lena's silver eyes glistened. "I ran from the blood. I hid in the fallow fields. I married a simple man and bore a simple daughter, and I prayed to the moon that the old power would skip you the way it skipped my own mother." She shook her head. "But it never skips the daughters, it only sleeps, and now you've woken it." "Do I do?" Lena's form began to fade, dissolving into motes of silver light. "Find the stone. Before Louis does, the stone will tell you the truth of who you are, and who he is to you." "What stone?" Mama, wait. But the dream shattered. Otella woke gasping. Her sheets tangled, the taste of moonlight on her tongue. and in the darkness of the tower room, she realized she was not alone. A shadow stood by the window, tall, broad-shouldered, golden eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers in the brazier. Bad dreams? King Louis asked. Tella scrambled backward on the bed, her spine pressing against the cold stone wall. The sheets tangled around her legs like restraints. Her heart hammered so violently she could feel it in her temples. Long have you been standing there? Her voice came out thin and breathless. Louis didn't move from the window. The dying embers of the brazier cast his face in shifting shadows of orange and black. He was dressed simply, dark tunic, leather breeches, boots that had seen mud and snow. No crown, no ceremonial furs. He looked younger like this, closer to the 18-year-old boy Inez had described, the one who had killed his uncle and taken a throne he never wanted. Long enough, he said. Tella's mind raced. Had she spoken in her sleep? Had she said her mother's name, asked about the stone? The dream was already fading, slipping through her fingers like water, but the urgency of it remained. Find the stone, before Louis does. You were dreaming of her. Louis turned from the window, his golden eyes finding hers in the darkness. Your mother, I could smell the grief on you from the corridor. Tella's fear curdled into something sharper. Anger. You were in the corridor, watching me sleep. This is my keep. Every room in it is mine. Every breath taken within these walls belongs to me. He said it without arrogance, as if stating a simple fact of nature. The sky is blue. The river runs south. The alpha owns the air. But I didn't come here to frighten you. Then why are you here? It's the middle of the night. Louis was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his tunic and withdrew something wrapped in a square of faded velvet. He held it out to her, his large hand steady. I found answers, he said, or the beginnings of them. You deserve to see. Tella hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her not to take anything from this man, this wolf, who had been ready to blind her, who had claimed her as his, who watched her sleep from the shadows. But the stirring at the base of her skull pulsed with recognition. Whatever was in that velvet, it wanted her to touch it. She reached out. Her fingers brushed his palm as she took the bundle. His skin was warm, roughened with calluses and old scars. The velvet fell away. It was a locket. Small, oval, made of silver so tarnished it was nearly black. The metal was etched with patterns that hurt to look at directly, swirls and angles that seemed to shift when she blinked. It hung from a broken chain, the link snapped clean through. Open it, Louis said. Otella's thumbnail found the catch. The locket sprang open with a soft click. Inside were 2 miniature portraits, painted with exquisite detail on thin slips of ivory. The first was a woman. She had sharp cheekbones, silver eyes, and a cascade of dark hair. There was something regal in the tilt of her chin, something fierce and untamed. She wore a simple green dress, but around her neck hung a stone pendant, a pale, milky crystal that seemed to glow even in paint. The second portrait was a man. He had Louis's jaw, Louis's brow, Louis's golden eyes. Your mother, Otella breathed, looking at the woman. And your father. Louis's voice was tight. My father, Aldrich, Alpha of the Black Pine. And my mother, whose name I was forbidden to speak after her death, whose portrait I was ordered to burn, whose very existence was scrubbed from the pack records. Looked up at him. The torchlight caught the scar bisecting his eyebrow. Why? Because she was like you. Louis crouched down beside the bed, bringing himself to her level. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the purple shadows under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. He hadn't slept. He'd been in the archives, just as Inez said. Her name was Serafina. She came to the Black Pine 30 years ago, a refugee from the Eastern Territories. She married my father, bore me, and lived quietly for 6 years. No one knew what she was, not even my father, I think. Happened to her? Louis's jaw tightened. When I was 6 years old, a traveler came to the keep, a wolf from the Iron Coast. He took one look at my mother and started screaming. He called her Malakkin. Blood of the first pack. He said she was an abomination that should have been culled 3 centuries ago. The word hung in the air like smoke. Culled. My father tried to protect her. He killed the traveler and swore the pack to silence, but rumors spread. Within a year, the Sunken Valley Pack declared war on us, using my mother's bloodline as justification. They claimed the Black Pine was harboring forbidden magic, threatening the balance of all the packs. Louis's hands curled into fists at his sides. My mother surrendered herself to stop the war. She walked into the Sunken Valley alone and never came out. My father broke. He spent the next 12 years drinking himself into an early grave, leaving the pack to rot and my uncle to scheme. Otella's throat ached. She looked down at the locket, at the woman with the silver eyes. Serafina, Louis's mother, a daughter of the first pack, just like my mother, she whispered. Yes. Louis reached out and gently closed the locket in her palm, his fingers wrapping around hers. The touch was electric, sending a shiver up her arm. Your mother, Lena, And my mother, Seraphina, both daughters of the bloodline, both hiding in plain sight, both dying before they could explain what they were. Otella's mind spun. But why? Why hide? Why not teach us what we are? Because knowing is a death sentence. Louis released her hand and stood, packing to the window. The moonlight silvered his profile. The packs hunted the first bloodline to extinction because their power was absolute. An alpha of the first pack didn't just command wolves, they commanded everything. The wind, the stone, the very earth beneath our feet. They were gods walking in fur and flesh. And the wolves who came after, the diluted bloodlines, the lesser packs like mine, couldn't bear to live in their shadow. He turned back to face her. So they killed them all. Every man, woman, and child who carried the blood. They burned their records. They outlawed the old tongue, and they told themselves it was for the good of all wolf kind. Some survived, Otella said. My mother, yours, survived and hid and bred with humans, diluting the blood further with each generation, until the power was so faint it was barely a whisper. Louis's golden eyes bored into hers. Until you spoke Malakash and the power answered. It answered so strongly that every wolf in that hall felt the world tilt. That's not diluted blood, Otella. That's something purer, something that hasn't been seen in centuries. Tella's hand closed around the locket. The silver was warm now, almost hot, as if it recognized her touch. What does that mean? What am I supposed to? Don't know. The admission seemed to cost Louis something. His shoulders sagged just slightly. The archives are incomplete. My uncle destroyed most of the old records when he tried to seize power, but I found one fragment. A single page, hidden inside the binding of a mundane tax ledger. He reached into his tunic again and withdrew a scrap of parchment, yellowed and fragile. He handed it to her. The writing was in a script Otella didn't recognize, angular, flowing, like claw marks dragged through ink. But as she stared at it, the marks seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, forming words she could suddenly understand. When the blood wakes, seek the stone of first light. It lies beneath the roots of the mother tree, where the veiled river meets the mountain's shadow. Only the stone can reveal the truth of the bloodline. Only the stone can bind or break the claimant's bond, but where the alpha who wears no crown. He will seek the stone for his own ends. Do not let him claim it before the blood has spoken. Otella's hands trembled. The stone. The same word her mother had whispered in the dream. Find the stone. Before Louis does, she looked up at the king. He was watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. You want the stone, she said. For your own ends. I want to understand what I am. Louis's voice was raw, stripped of its alpha command. I am the son of Seraphina. The blood runs in my veins too, but it's never woken. I've never spoken the old tongue. I've never felt the power you felt. His jaw clenched. I am a half-blood. A failed heir to a legacy I didn't know existed until you walked into my hall and broke my world open with a single word. Otella stared at him. The Alpha King, who had seemed so terrifying, so invincible, was standing before her with his soul laid bare. He was afraid. Not of her, but of what he wasn't, of the power that had skipped him and chosen her instead. Take me to the stone, she said quietly. Tomorrow, at first light. Louis's golden eyes flared with something, hope, hunger she couldn't tell. You would trust me. No, Otella met his gaze steadily. But I don't have a choice. You said it yourself. I'm the most dangerous person in this kingdom, and I don't even know why. I need answers. The stone has them. She lifted the locket, the silver warm against her palm. And I think your mother would want you to have answers, too. Louis was silent for a long, aching moment. Then he nodded. First light, he said. I'll have whales prepare supplies. We travel light and fast. No guards, no escort. The fewer who know about the stone, the better. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something other than fear or hunger or cold calculation in his eyes. She saw grief. My mother used to sing to me, he said quietly. A lullaby in a language I didn't understand. I thought it was nonsense, baby talk. His voice cracked. It was the old tongue, wasn't it? She was trying to wake the blood in me, and I was too young to hear it. Before Otella could respond, he was gone. The door clicked shut, and she was alone with the dying embers and the warm silver locket in her hands. She opened it again and looked at Seraphina's painted face. The woman's silver eyes seemed to look back at her, patient and knowing. Find the stone, her mother's voice echoed in her memory. The stone will tell you the truth of who you are, and who he is to you. Who he is to you, Otella's breath caught. She looked at the second portrait, Aldrich, Louis's father, and then back at Seraphina. A terrible, impossible suspicion began to form in her mind. Her mother, Lena, Louis's mother, Seraphina. Both daughters of the first pack, both hiding in human villages, both dead before their children could know them, What were the chances? She closed the locket and pressed it to her chest, feeling the silver pulse with warmth against her heart. Tomorrow she would find the stone. And she had the sinking feeling that the truth it revealed would shatter everything she thought she knew. About herself, about Louis, and about the blood that bound them both. They left before the sun breached the eastern ridge. The keep was silent, wrapped in the gray hush of pre-dawn. Frost crunched beneath Otella's borrowed boots as Wales led them through a servant's gate at the base of the eastern wall. The steward's face was pinched with worry, his hazel eyes darting toward the keep's upper windows where Beta Inez's silhouette stood watching, arms crossed, silver hair catching the first pale light. She knows, Wales murmured to Louis as he handed over a pack of provisions. She didn't try to stop me, but she knows. Inez has always known more than she says. Louis shouldered the pack without breaking stride. She'll keep the pack calm until we return. If we return, Otella thought. She didn't voice it. They walked in silence as the forest swallowed them. The black pine was ancient, its trees so tall and dense that the sky became a distant suggestion of gray between the canopy. The air smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sharp, clean scent of running water somewhere ahead. The veiled river. Tella's legs ached by midday. She was a trapper's daughter, accustomed to walking the fallow fields, but the mountain terrain was different. Roots snagged her boots. Rocks shifted beneath her weight. Louis moved ahead of her with an effortless grace that reminded her, painfully, that he was not human. His footsteps made no sound. His breathing never quickened. He was a predator in his element, and she was a clumsy guest in his world. They stopped once to eat, dried venison and hardtack from Wales's pack, sitting on opposite sides of a fallen log. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. Afraid of what we'll find, Otella said finally. It wasn't a question. Louis didn't look at her. He stared into the trees, his golden eyes tracking something she couldn't see. I've spent 4 years building walls around myself, around my pack. Every decision I've made, every enemy I've killed, every mercy I've denied. It was all to keep the black pine from crumbling the way it did under my father. He tore a piece of venison with his teeth. Now I'm walking into the heart of the forest with a woman who speaks the language of gods, chasing a stone that might tell me everything I built was built on a lie. Yes, I'm afraid. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my mother used to tell me that fear was just a sign you were paying attention. Louis looked at her then. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the iron mask. Your mother sounds like she was wise. Was. Otella stood, brushing bark from her borrowed trousers. Let's keep moving. I want to know the truth before dark. They found the mother tree as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. It was unmistakable. The trunk was wider than the keep's great hall, its bark a pale silver white that seemed to glow in the fatting light. Its roots burst from the earth like the coils of a buried serpent, creating a natural cathedral of arched wood and dark soil. And there, where the largest root plunged into the bank of the veiled river, the water ran black and silent, reflecting the mountain's shadow. This is it, Otella breathed. The stirring at the base of her skull had become a roar. The voice that had whispered since she spoke Malakash was no longer a whisper. It was a song, ancient, wordless, pulling her toward the tree like a tide. Louis caught her arm. Wait! She looked up at him. His face was pale, his jaw tight. What's wrong? I can't feel it, he said. His voice was rough with something that sounded like grief. The pull, the song, whatever is calling you, I can't hear it. I'm standing at the threshold of my mother's legacy, and I'm deaf to it. Otella understood then. The fear she had seen in him wasn't just about what the stone might reveal. It was about what it might confirm, that the blood had truly passed him by. That he was, and would always be, only half of what she was becoming. Then let me be your ears, she said softly. She held out her hand. Louis stared at her hand for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, he took it. His palm was warm and rough, and his grip was tight, not possessive, but desperate. Like a drowning man reaching for driftwood, they approached the mother tree together. The roots shifted as they drew near. Otella gasped, stumbling back, but Louis held her steady. The wood groaned and creaked, and then, impossibly, the largest roots split open. Not violently. Gently, like a door swinging wide for an expected guest. Inside the hollow, cradled by centuries of growth, lay a stone. It was the size of a human heart, pale and milky just like the pendant in Seraphina's portrait. It glowed with a soft internal light that pulsed in rhythm with Otella's heartbeat. As she watched, tendrils of silver and gold swirled beneath its surface like captured starlight. Stone of first light, she whispered. She released Louis's hand and reached for it. Otella, wait. But her fingers had already closed around the stone. The world vanished. She stood in the silver forest from her dream. The moon hung low and impossibly large. The trees whispered in a language she now understood. And before her stood two women, Lena, her mother, wearing the same patched dress, the same sad smile, and Serafina, Louis's mother. Silver-eyed and regal, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, they stood side by side, hand in hand. Sisters. The knowledge slammed into Otella like a physical blow. Not just sisters of the bloodline, sisters. Born of the same mother, separated by war and fear and 3 decades of hiding. You see now, Lena said, her voice echoed with that strange harmonic resonance. Why I never told you, why I prayed the blood would sleep. You and Serafina were siblings. Otella's voice shook. Which means Louis and I are cousins, Serafina said. Her golden eyes, Louis's eyes, were gentle. Bound by blood, bound by the old magic, the last 2 heirs of the first pack. There are no others, Lena continued. We were the final daughters of the line. Our mother, your grandmother, was hunted and killed when we were children. We were separated. I was hidden in the fallow fields. Serafina was taken east. We never saw each other again. We dreamed of each other, Serafina said softly. Across the miles, across the years, we felt each other's joys and sorrows, and we both bore children in the hope that the blood would waken one of them. It woke in you, Lena said. Her silver eyes glistened. Not Louis. You are the true heir, the voice of the first pack. The power is yours to command. Otella's chest ached. But Louis. He wants it so badly. He deserves the truth, Serafina interrupted gently. He is your blood, your kin, the bond between you is sacred. But the power chose you, Otella, not him. That is not a punishment, it is a purpose. What purpose? Lena stepped forward and placed a ghostly hand on Otella's cheek. The touch was cool like morning mist. To end the war that killed us. The packs have been hunting our blood for 300 years. They fear what they cannot control. But you can show them another way. You can speak the old tongue. You can remind them of what they lost when they slaughtered the first pack. You can unite them, Serafina added. Not through conquest, through kinship. You are the bridge between wolf and human, between the old blood and the new. Louis is your sword and shield. Together you can build something that hasn't existed since the moon split the beasts from the men. True pack, Lena said. One that doesn't hunt its own. The forest began to fade. The moon dimmed. The silver trees dissolved into mist. Tell my son, Serafina called, her voice growing distant, that I loved him, that I sang to him every night, hoping he would hear. Tell him the blood didn't fail him, it saved him for you. World snapped back into focus. Tella gasped, her knees buckling. Louis caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. The stone of first light was clutched in her white-knuckled hand, still pulsing with its internal glow. Otella. His voice was rough with panic. Otella, look at me. What happened? What did you see? She looked up at him, the scar bisecting his eyebrow. The golden eyes so like his mother's, the fear and hope warring in his expression. Her cousin, her blood, her sword and shield. I saw our mothers, she said, her voice raw. Lena and Serafina. They were sisters, Louis, real sisters. Separated when they were children. Louis went utterly still. His arms tightened around her reflexively. Sisters, he repeated. The word seemed to crack something open inside him. Then we're cousins. Otella reached up, her trembling fingers brushing the scar on his brow. The last 2 heirs of the first pack. A long moment, Louis didn't speak. He stared at her with an expression she couldn't read, grief, wonder, something deeper and more fragile. Then, slowly, he lowered his forehead to hers. His breath was warm against her lips. I felt it, he whispered. When you touched the stone, for just a moment I felt it, the song, the power. It was like hearing my mother's voice for the first time in 20 years. Said to tell you she loved you. Otella's voice broke. She sang to you every night, hoping you would hear. She said the blood didn't fail you, it saved you. For me. Louis made a sound, a raw, broken thing that was half sob, half growl. His hands came up to cradle her face, and for a terrible, beautiful moment she thought he might kiss her. But he didn't. He just held her, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air, sharing the same grief. What do we do now? He asked finally. Tella looked down at the stone in her hand. It pulsed warmly, patiently, waiting. We go back, she said. We tell Inez, we tell the pack. And then we tell the others, the Iron Coast, the Sunken Valley, every wolf who spent 300 years hunting our blood. We tell them the heir of the first pack has returned. Not to rule them, not to punish them, to remind them of who they were before the fear. They'll try to kill you. Louis's voice was hard. The moment you reveal yourself, every alpha in the territories will see you as a threat. Then you'll protect me. She met his golden eyes. Cousin. The word hung between them, strange and new and full of possibility. Louis's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile, the first she had ever seen on his face. Been protecting you since you whispered that word in my hall, he said. I just didn't know why. He released her face and stood, offering his hand to pull her up. Come, we have a long walk back and you need to teach me everything our mothers told you. Otella took his hand and rose. The stone of first light was warm in her pocket, its pulse syncing with her heartbeat. The stirring at the base of her skull had settled into something calm and patient. No longer a whisper of fear, but a song of belonging. They walked out of the shadow of the mother tree together, leaving the veiled river behind. Behind them, the root closed silently, sealing the hollow until the next heir came seeking truth 3 days later. Otella stood on the steps of the great hall, facing the assembled black pine pack. Louis stood at her side, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a gesture of support, not possession. Wales hovered nearby, clutching a freshly inked scroll. Beta Inez stood at the base of the steps, her gray eyes sharp and watchful but no longer hostile. Otella looked out at the sea of faces, wolves who had wanted her blinded, exiled, caged. Now they watched her with wary curiosity. Rumors had spread in their absence, whispers of the old tongue, of the first pack. Of an alpha who had left as a king and returned as something else. She took a deep breath, and then she spoke. My name is Otella, daughter of Lena, heir of the first pack, and I have come not to rule you but to remind you of what you are. The words came easily now, not the old tongue, not yet, but the truth. The power didn't need ancient words to be felt. It was in her voice, in her blood. In the way the wolves before her straightened, their eyes brightening, their postures shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like hope. Beside her, Louis watched the pack transform. His golden eyes glistened. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was the sword and shield. She was the voice. And together they would remind the world of what it had lost. 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. Winter had come and gone, and now the first green shoots of spring pushed through the thawing earth of the Black Pine territory. The veiled river ran fast and clear, no longer the dark, silent thing it had been beneath the mother tree's shadow. Birds that had fled south returned to build nests in the ancient pines. The pack moved through the forest with a lightness that had been absent for years. And Otella, daughter of Lena, heir of the first pack, stood on the balcony of the keep and watched the sun rise over the mountains she now called home. She was no longer the trembling girl who had knelt on cold stone, bound and condemned. The rough-spun wool of her servant's dress had been replaced by a tunic of soft green, embroidered at the cuffs with silver thread in patterns that echoed the swirls on Serafina's locket. Her mousy brown hair, once tangled and forgotten, now fell in a neat braid over her shoulder. And in her pocket, always warm against her thigh, rested the stone of first light. She had not spoken the old tongue again since that day in the great hall. Not because she couldn't. The words came easily now, rising unbidden when she dreamed, but because she was learning when not to speak. Power, she had discovered, was not in the volume of one's voice. It was in the choosing. A familiar presence materialized behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She could feel him now, the way she could feel the shift of weather or the pulse of the stone. Louis, her cousin, her alpha, her sword and shield. Awake early, he said, coming to stand beside her at the balcony rail. His golden eyes reflected the dawn light, and the scar bisecting his eyebrow had faded slightly, softened by months of something that looked almost like peace. I wanted to watch the sun rise. Otella leaned her forearms on the cold stone. It feels different now. Every morning feels like a gift I wasn't supposed to receive. Louis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know that feeling. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sky bloom from gray to gold to pale, endless blue. Below, the sounds of the keep waking drifted up, wails shouting about a misplaced ledger, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of pups tumbling through the courtyard. It was a good sound. A living sound. I received a raven last night, Louis said finally. From the Iron Coast. Tella's heart clenched. The Iron Coast pack had been the most aggressive of their neighbors, the ones who had raided the eastern villages, the ones whose traveler had exposed Serafina all those years ago. Since Otella's revelation, they had been silent, watching, waiting. What did it say? Their alpha wants to meet, at the border, under a truce banner. Louis's jaw tightened. He says he wants to hear the heir of the first pack speak for herself. Otella turned to face him fully. The morning light caught the planes of his face, the hard jaw, the proud brow, the mouth that had learned to smile again. He was still the alpha king who had terrified her in the great hall, but he was also the man who had held her forehead to his in the shadow of the mother tree, the man who had wept at his mother's final message, the man who had spent 6 months learning to share power instead of hoarding it. And if I speak, she said slowly, and they still want war, Louis's golden eyes met hers. Then we fight, together, as blood. the word settled between them, warm and solid. Blood. It had taken months for the strangeness of it to fade. The knowledge that their mothers had been sisters, that they shared a grandmother who had died hunted and afraid. They were cousins. Kin. The last two branches of a tree that had nearly been chopped down and burned. But somewhere along the way, the word had grown to mean something more. Tella reached into her pocket and withdrew the stone of first light. It pulsed softly in her palm, milky white with swirls of silver and gold. Louis watched it with an expression of quiet reverence. He could not feel its song the way she could, but he had stopped mourning that absence. Instead, he had learned to listen through her. "What does it tell you?" he asked. Tella closed her eyes and let the stone's warmth flow up her arm. The ancient voice that had once been a terrifying whisper was now a familiar comfort. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in feelings, in images, in the deep, resonant knowledge that she was not alone and never had been. "It tells me," she said slowly, "that this is what our mothers wanted, not hiding, not running, not letting the blood sleep forever." She opened her eyes and looked at Louis. "They wanted us to stand in the light, to show the Pax that the first bloodline isn't a curse, it's a memory of who we all were before the fear." Louis was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently closed her fingers around the stone, his warm hand enveloping hers. "Then we go to the Iron Coast," he said. "You speak, and whatever happens after, we face it together." Nodded. The fear was still there, a small cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer the paralyzing terror of the girl who had knelt on the great hall floor. It was the manageable fear of a woman who knew what she was fighting for. "Louis," she said, and he looked at her with those golden eyes that had once promised her blindness and death. "Thank you for not killing me that day." Corner of his mouth lifted, a true smile, rare and precious. "Made it very difficult to kill you, whispering ancient words, summoning the power of gods, very inconvenient." Tella laughed. The sound surprised her, bright and clear in the morning air. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Perhaps she never had, not really, not before this. "Try to be less inconvenient in the future," she said. "Don't." Louis's voice was suddenly serious. He stepped closer, his hand still wrapped around hers and the stone. "Don't ever be less than what you are, Otella." That's what the old Pax got wrong. They tried to make the first bloodline small, controllable, killable, but you— His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "You are exactly what you were meant to be, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure the world lets you be that." Otella's throat tightened. She looked at their joined hands, his large and scarred, hers smaller but no longer trembling. The stone pulsed between them, warm and steady, a heartbeat. Two hearts, one blood. "Sun is up," she said softly. "We should go inside. Inez will have breakfast waiting, and she gets irritable when the porridge goes cold." Louis laughed, a real laugh, deep and unexpected. The beta who faced down 17 rivals in single combat, defeated by cold porridge. Some battles are universal. They turned together and walked back into the keep, leaving the balcony and the sunrise behind. The stone of first light went back into Otella's pocket, its warmth a constant companion. The day ahead was full of plans and preparations, messages to send, alliances to forge, a journey to the Iron Coast that could end in peace or war. But for now, in this moment, there was only this. Two heirs of a hunted bloodline, walking side by side through a keep that had become a home. The last of their kind, but no longer alone. Behind them, high in the mother tree beyond the veiled river, a new bud unfurled on an ancient branch. The forest whispered in a language older than wolves, older than men, older than fear. They are coming. The children of the first light. And this time, they will not be silenced. If you enjoy reading this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for reading.